Hi, my name is Tom Schultz. I'm here today to talk about a book I'm writing entitled Kindred Connections, The Story of Love. This is a story about a spiritual journey that I've been on for many years, in which I conclude that God is love. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, God is love? That's not a new concept. In my book, though, the conclusion is God is love literally, not an abstract concept or a figurative idea of who God is. God is love literally. What I want you to do is for the next 10 minutes, sit back and relax and follow me on a journey that describes a portion of the content of this book I am writing. I want you to start by imagining the following. Assume for a minute that the following statements I make are literal. They are verses out of the Bible. First of all, in John, John talks about God is love. I want you to assume that that is a literal interpretation of a manifestation of God. Second thing I want you to do is imagine the following verses being true. There are a number of verses that make the statement that God is in us. Okay, God is in us and God is love. What would that look like? I want to do a little experiment here that illustrates what that might look like. Imagine the following. Assume we have a beaker here, and this beaker represents God, and in it is God's love. Imagine we have a test tube here representing you, an empty vessel. Now, what does it mean for God to be in you? Well, it can be illustrated as follows. Imagine the following. Okay, seems like a simple demonstration here. Now we have God's love in you. You're experiencing God's love. Okay, but if this is you, and you're looking up here, you're asking the question, okay, that's nice, I'm experiencing God's love, but I'm looking up here going, gosh, there's a lot more of love to experience. God has a lot more love. How can I get more of God in me to experience? Well, let's look at a little experiment that demonstrates that concept. Okay, now imagine the following. Imagine this is you now, this empty vessel, and this is another person here. We have a tube here connecting the two of you here. Now, watch. Okay, we pour God's love into you, same amount we had before. And what happens is it runs out through this tube into this other person, allowing you to experience more of God's love. Okay, there's an important principle to learn from this. First of all, namely, that in order to experience more of God's love, you have to give away the love that God has put in you in the first place. Okay, now, is this demonstration really valid from a biblical perspective? And I claim the answer is yes. Imagine the following. Again, this is a slightly different model here. This is you and another person here, and we have this thing connecting the two of you, I claim, should be a literal interpretation of God. It's a connection here. Okay, in the Bible, in Mark, we read where it says, where two or more are gathered in my name, there shall I be. So here's you, here's another person. Well, where's God? God is this connection connecting the two of you. In Matthew, we read that the two shall become one. So here's you and another person. Well, what does that look like? It looks like the two of you getting closer and closer together, and God becoming instilled in both of you to a greater degree, until eventually the two of you become one. Now, what does that look like in reality? Let's look at an example of what that would mean in a real-life situation. Imagine the following for a minute. You're walking down the street, and you trip and fall, and you skin your knee, and it's bleeding all over the place. Would you ever get up and start yelling and screaming at your knee? The answer is no. You would never do that because your knee is part of you. You are one. Now, what a oneness looks like with respect to a second person is that exact behavior. If you had a oneness with your spouse, you would never yell at them. Now, if you think for a minute, there was a movie out back in the 70s called Love Story, and there's a famous line in there that says, love is never having to say you're sorry. It turns out that the writer actually got it right. Maybe not for reasons they said, but if you really were one with that person, you would treat them like you would your knee. You'd never yell at them. Okay, so this here illustrates a connection between two people. What would a connection look like? What would that model look like for an entire community? It would look like the following here. So imagine one of these balls is you, another one's your spouse, family, and friends, and I claim here, these red connectors here are God. Now, think about this for a minute. most of the time people envision God as this nebulous entity out in the ether here. And what I'm claiming is, in interpreting these connectors as literal interpretation of God being love here, it says that God is not merely this nebulous entity, that God is inside us, and God is the thing that connects us together. This notion of community here and a desire for it is a universal desire in all of us. And to make that illustration here, imagine the following. Go up to Green Bay, Wisconsin someday on a Sunday night in the middle of December, and you will find there's no one in their homes. The majority of people are all at the stadium watching their beloved Packers play football in the freezing cold. They're sitting on a cold bench, paid an exorbitant amount of money for tickets, for parking, for refreshments to watch their Packers. Now, think about that for a second. Why on God's green earth would someone do that as opposed to sitting in the comfort and convenience of their own home? The reason why is because the amount of love that they experience is the summation of all of the people around them sharing that same experience. The desire to love and be loved and connected is a universal desire in all of us. Now, there's an important conclusion one can make from all of this. Namely, the idea of atheism doesn't exist. There's no such thing as an atheist. An atheist would make the claim there's no such thing as God. And God would make the following statement. God would say, there's no such thing as an atheist. Why? Because I made you and I designed you such that you desire to be loved, to love and be loved, and to be connected. And that is a manifestation of me. So, what can we do with this idea that God is love? What can I take away with this? It impacts your whole thinking of everything, in particular, your relationship with your loved ones. Imagine for a minute that this is you and this is your spouse, and your spouse comes up to you and says, honey, how do you like my new dress? And you say to her, I think it makes you look fat. What do you think she's going to do? Well, she'll bolt. She'll separate from you. Okay, and what happens is this connection between the two of you is now broken here. Now, what are you going to do about it? Well, the Bible tells you exactly what you should do about it. If you read the Bible, what's the most important commandment? Jesus says the number one commandment is to love your Father, God, with all of your heart, soul, and mind. Okay? If this connection here is God, and you've broken this connection, then you need to mend this connection here. Okay, what's the second thing you can do with this idea of God being love? There have been lots of studies concerning love, and what they found is that it is real important to have physical touch. Touch is everything, gathered together. They found when they studied infants that have never had physical contact that they have serious emotional problems when they get older. Okay, so I want to challenge you to do the following. Next time you get into an argument with someone, okay, and they're ranting and raving at you, instead of backing away, which would be your normal inclination, I want you to go up to them, put your arms around them, and tell you love them. This happened to me a couple of years ago with my brother-in-law Alan, who was much older and wiser than me. He had done something that got me all upset, and I'm ranting and raving at him. So he comes up to me, he puts his arms around me, and he says, Tommy, I love you. Let me tell you, it is really difficult to stay mad at someone when they have their arms around you and they tell you that they love you. Okay, a third outcome of what can you do with this idea that God truly is love. I make a very bold claim that this idea of God being love explains one of the biggest mysteries in quantum physics. So what's quantum physics? Quantum physics is the study of quantum particles. We are made of quantum particles. In fact, everything in the universe is made of quantum particles. If you asked a quantum physicist to describe the behavior of quantum particles, they would say the following. Where two or more are gathered, there's a phenomena occurs such that the two become one. Now, you should be scratching your head and thinking to yourself, wait a minute, the idea of two becoming one and this oneness, didn't you just talk about that a minute ago when you were talking about human beings? And the answer is yes. It turns out that a number of verses that look like they apply simply at the human level actually have a much deeper meaning. So this idea in quantum physics, where two quantum particles are together as a result of interacting together, once you separate them, they know about each other forever. It's as if they love one another. So if quantum particles have this connection between them that can be described as love, and quantum particles are everywhere, that really suggests God is everywhere. Well, we're about out of time here. I hope you found today's message inspiring and uplifting and encouraging. And I would invite you to please give me feedback at the website here that you're observing now. And again, thank you for your time.